seems fair to me. Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it unacceptable by any reason.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Thanks so much for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. Lots of topics as this was the big election week. Let's first meet the panelists assembled around the big brown table, starting with Sarah Fenske, executive editor of Euclid Media, sitting in for Wendy Weiss, who's taking the week off. Joe Holleman from your Post-Dispatch and STLtoday.com, sitting in for Mr. Bill McClellan. Ray Hartmann sitting in for himself. He's with RawStory.com, the Riverfront Times, KTRS, and of course, Donnybrook. And from the St. Louis American, where he edits the news and writes that great sports column, Mr. Alvin Reid. Well, we do want to say that we think our viewership expanded by 1 on Tuesday evening. And there she is, that 8-pound, 15-ounce bundle of joy, Josephine Jo Catherine Admire, who is the daughter of Maggie and Jacob, the sister of Henry, and she also happens to be the granddaughter of Wendy Weiss. Oh, so that's really neat. Blessings to all, and thank you very much for the photos. Hey, we're going to start with you, Alvin. 53% of the voters Tuesday in Missouri approved, with limitations, pot, marijuana in the state of Missouri. And your newspaper has been pretty sharp in its criticism of that amendment, calling it sinister and even worse, and saying, you know, there's a lot of things in there that a lot of the voters may not know about. Like, for example, people talk about expungement, but not if you've been convicted of a B, C, or D felony. And we'll see who gets those licenses and what the price is going to be. Do you think there's any possibility there's going to be buyer's remorse in the state of Missouri?
Absolutely not. I was my mom is so proud that I get to start on this topic. And Mom, I don't have any socks on, but it's purpose because it's the last warm day. So I'll get that out of the way so she won't fuss at me. But no buyer's remorse. And also, I thought where it passed carried, you know, that bill, and you're talking about Kansas City area, St. Louis, Springfield, and a little pocket down there by Cape Girardeau, which is Southeast Missouri State, stood up and made itself proud. No buyer's remorse. I think that a lot of issues in the state, if we were to vote on them, you know, really more serious than that, that's how the voting would go too. So, no, I think it was time. I was pretty sure it was going to pass. I'm not surprised that it did by a pretty, you know, hefty margin, and I don't think, you know, the place will fall apart.
I think it'll actually be a very positive thing for the state. I have to, Dan Vietz, Columbia attorney, who's been doing this, and I was
long time.
He's so long that he was student body president at Mizzou when I was running the newspaper.
Wow.
Which means he's, you know, another ancient person like me. But he has fought this fight, and then John Payne. I have to tell you, I was one of the people critical of the thing itself, but never critical of voting for it. Just, I think it was an imperfect thing, but that's easy to say from the peanut gallery. And you've got to give them a remarkable amount of credit. What they did, with people on the left as well as right resisting them, I happen to think it was just an extraordinary thing that they got it passed. And hopefully, you know, even people opposed to it would agree that prohibition for marijuana was as disastrous as it was for alcohol. And I think we need to just, you know, people got to work incrementally to make it better, to make it fair. But it's a positive revenue generator.
Remind you, it's not possible to make it fair because you can't change this amendment unless you go back to the voters for another statewide amendment to the Constitution.
Look, what they did, people talk about other states have done this too. You start with the medicinal pot they have the first crack at it. That's
Why?
that's what made everybody so mad. That's
yeah,
not
there's a reason it made everybody
Well,
mad.
you know
They had
what?
micro licenses.
I got
This was
it.
the only way for the people shut out of the first
Right.
round to get in on
I
this.
get it.
And guess who was shut out of the first round? It was people of color.
Yeah, but
That's the
people of
problem.
color get shut out everything in Missouri.
Well,
and it's
doesn't
not
make
like,
it that we're
it
gonna
doesn't make it
double down
right.
on this.
But we weren't going to. Well, I'm not going to try to relitigate it because we won.
We're not
but it
litigating.
wasn't going to get it. It was not going to get better in 2 years. Everybody sees this mythical amendment that was going to be so great.
I
in 2
think
years.
it could have gotten better in 2 years.
Well,
they could have
maybe.
come back
and then all
gotten
the people,
some of this
you,
stuff right.
you know,
Right.
and
Hey,
you know who would have suffered? And then people of color would have been the ones getting arrested for the next 2 years. I mean, it's just not. It's not.
I think when people find out that they can't smoke in public, that they can't have
they
more than
shouldn't
3
be able
ounces.
to smoke in public.
Well,
I mean,
what are
really,
you talking about?
Right.
I'm saying
Why
you
not?
should not because
that's
you
against
should
the
not
law.
be
That's
going down the
against the
street.
law.
You know,
No, you can smoke in public. You can smoke on a cigarette.
Excuse
on
me,
a
and
sidewalk.
you should
You
not
can't
be
walk
able
down
to
the
walk
street with
down
a
the
whiskey
street
bottle
while
in your
pot
hand.
and some
You
kids.
can, you can have a tobacco cigarette. Of course you
No,
can walk
I'm
down
just
the
talking.
sidewalk.
I'm just saying that just because you passed this marijuana
Okay.
statute, you know, and I left out Columbia. You mentioned Columbia. Columbia was our fifth pothead.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, though, about the state of Missouri. How is it that the voters in this state approve all these liberal measures at the ballot box, like expanding Medicaid or saying no to right to work and expanding pot, but then when it comes to the candidates themselves, they're so deeply red?
Well, because of gerrymandering, for one thing, and
But the U.S. Senate couldn't be gerrymandered.
I
No,
think
well,
at this point, I think marijuana is not a right versus left issue. And I
Thank
guess the
you. Thank you.
politicians
Thank
are
you.
still forcing themselves into
Right.
these old suits that no
Thank
longer
you.
fit. But I know just as many Republicans who smoke pot as Democrats.
That's a great
I
point.
think that is the point there itself. And in fact, I'm glad it passed. I have a bunch of problems with what it says, but it needed to pass. I have a problem with the fact of limiting licenses to a certain amount of people. I think the market should decide.
Amen.
Just like with
and
a
By the
liquor
way-
license, as long as you qualify that you're this sort of person, because you could open up a pot store on every corner, and after a certain amount of time, one of them will close, and another time, another one will close, because somebody will do it better than the other. It's called, capitalism.
Right.
Exactly.
And
You're
that's how they
absolutely
should do
right.
it.
But guess
and
what?
everybody should get a shot.
In this amendment that passed, there are no limits. So the fact is, and Dan Vietz made that point on my show last night, that there are no limits. So you're absolutely right about that point, that there should be more licenses. There can be. There's nothing to keep the legislature or anybody else from doing as many licenses as they want.
Okay.
And that's the kind of thing that people are all
Let's
worked up
move
about.
on.
You can do it.
Sarah, with 51.5% of the vote, Dr. Sam Page, the county executive, was reelected. He defeated Mark Mantovani, who was the Democrat turned Republican candidate at the last minute. Mantovani had 7 weeks to campaign. Of course, we know Catherine Pinner, the woman who won the primary, dropped out. That's a whole other story. But if Mantovani had 7 months, not 7 weeks, would he have had a better chance?
I don't think it would have made any difference. You know, I think for people who follow county politics closely, many people thought that Page was a damaged candidate and that some of the scandals that he had were going to catch up to him. But guess what? A lot of people do not follow county politics closely. And that would not have changed if we were looking at 7 months instead of 7 weeks. You know, this was an election that brought out a lot of people. They're coming to vote for Senate. They're watching Fox News or MSNBC, and they're very wound up about national politics. And then they're just checking a box of somebody they think they might have heard of for county executive.
I disagree. I think that that's not very smart, is it?
I disagree, because I think they'd be watching 9 PBS as well as
Oh,
those
yes.
two
I did
stations.
mean to add that. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I do think that he would have had a much better chance if he had a longer campaign. Mark Mantovani, who I thought was a really good candidate. But let's be clear about something. Sam, we live in a time where so few candidates even concede anymore. And my view is, I voted for Mantovani, felt strongly about him, but you know, Sam Page won. So my attitude is, let's move forward. There's no sense woulda, coulda, shoulda. I will say this, that I do think, now that Sam Page is in for 4 years, I wish, regardless of that or anything else, that we went to nonpartisan elections in St. Louis County like most counties do and most cities do, because the issues that affect county government are not, we've talked about it before, are not left, right, liberal, Democratic, Republican issues, and I see no function for the political parties in St. Louis County.
Well, funny you say that. I counted, correct me if I'm wrong, folks out there, Mantovani got 30,000 more votes as a Republican in St. Louis County than Eric Schmidt did on Tuesday.
Oh, he got he got blasted in St. Louis County. I mean, that was one thing that was like, okay, well, just who. I knew that Trudy was Valentine would win St. Louis County, but no, that was a thrashing. And once again, people aren't as polarized maybe as we think they are. As the rhetoric tells us there is.
Don't you think with Schmidt, a lot of people are like, this guy sued my school district.
You're exactly
I mean,
right.
that really got some St. Louis County parents wound up who otherwise might not care about.
You're right. That's a good point.
I think that in the end of it, though, is we talk about all this, and I've made the statement before. You know, I'm in a newspaper business, you're in radio or television, and we sit around and we talk about politics all the time, and we try to predict what's going to happen. And the bottom line is, more than half the people don't even care enough to go out and vote.
That's right.
So a lot of times we're talking to each other about these nuances of candidates, and I agree with Sarah. I think some people will go to a bowl and go, Sam Page, I think that's the guy who's in it. Okay. I know that name. I mean, you know, so the idea that there's this somebody sitting down with charts and graphs trying to figure out who they're going to vote for. When I saw something on national television where they were doing exit polls and came out and was talking about last-minute rushes of ads, and they were saying that it was like 68% of voters said they decided who they were going to vote for a month or more in advance. Instead, we're inundated with these ridiculous commercials at the end when most people have made up their mind.
Well,
and the idea that people are spending hours talking about politics, that's not what real people
Not just the commercial, but the debate between Page and Mantovani likely occurred after a lot of people already voted.
That's true. And there's one other thing about Eric Schmidt that might be in defense of the voters in St. Louis County, that they probably didn't recognize him. I mean, for example, those folks in Bridgeton thinking, he was a poor kid in Bridgeton and, you know, working, hater of wealth, you know, that's he got a, you know, that's how he pronounced himself. You know, he was a, you know, just a poor kid from the streets.
He was certainly the poorest person running for that office.
By a lot. And,
I mean, how
you
far
know,
do you want to go down that road, right?
I was really impressed with Schmidt and his pledge not to take any campaign contributions from wealthy people.
Well,
you know, that was,
well, I will say, I did not like the fact that she, Trudy Bush Valentine, was referred to as an heiress.
I have to agree with you.
I don't think that Jay Rockefeller or John Danforth were known as an heir.
You know that somebody on the Democratic side threw that in one of Republicans' face on the Illinois side. That was one of the ads that was on TV.
Exactly.
So that got thrown
Well,
back in
I saw it in the
Republican, too.
media. You would see reports on her, and instead of calling her a nurse or a philanthropist, she was known as an heiress.
No, I think you're right, and I agree with you, but I will say this. I was joking a minute ago, but the idea that a Republican in this era of huge money on both sides is like attacking wealth. It's like, I don't even know how to put that into words.
Now, how about,
and again,
the
both
city of
sides
St.
have
Louis,
a lot of money.
Ray, you remember, it wasn't that long ago when the city of St. Louis was trying to start a stadium for the Rams before they left town. And Megan Green, a member of the Board of Aldermen, claimed bribery. These colleagues of hers were taking bribes. And people were poo-pooing her, saying, that's not happening. Well, it turns out she was right. That some were, and ironically, she's the one who benefits from that. She replaces the briber, Lou Reid, as president of the Board of Aldermen. She was elected.
I think it was the bribee, but
yeah, that's right.
Just to get this right, let's keep our facts.
I appreciate
it. It's kind of in the weeds there.
Okay, but no, she defeated Jack Coder on Tuesday.
She did
a sizable.
Well, and I think the margin's significant because if it were a one vote or two vote thing, we might see a rematch. A lot of people are a little jaded about the fact that the city seems to have a lot of elections, but it's not that bizarre. There's in place of the primary and the general, there's now a runoff and so forth. And this was a special election because the president of the Board of Aldermen resigned. And so that's what happened this year. On schedule, next March and April, I guess it is, there will be an initial election and then a runoff. And I think her vote margin of 10% plus will, and I happen to be thinking it's great that she won, but I think it will discourage any really serious competition.
I absolutely disagree with that. There will be very serious competition.
There
will be a lot of people deciding whether or not to run in this race. Tashara Jones did a huge favor to Megan Green in that she kind of like cleared the playing field of other progressive candidates, other African-American candidates, by making it clear she was going to throw her support behind Megan Green. And that did keep a lot of people out of that race, and you had to make your decision very quickly because this was due to Louis Reed's resignation.
You think that's going to change?
That allowed Megan to get a whole lot of votes in North St. Louis that she has never been able to get before. Now, she's run 2 times previous citywide. That does really help your name recognition. That's a huge advantage she had over Jack Coder. But there is a candidate who could theoretically beat her, and that's a candidate who can bring North City voters together with the old Southwest pro-cop faction in deep South City. That's the Louis Reid coalition.
Well, who's
that candidate?
Great question.
No, I'm not arguing that. I didn't say she'll be unopposed.
I'm going to say
I'm just saying I don't think she's got to. I don't.
There's going to be some very smart people thinking very hard about how to find that candidate, because for every person who voted for Megan Green, there's a lot of people who don't like Megan Green. She will have competition.
Well, I didn't say that.
I
just don't think she's going to have
looking at this one, too, is there's the benefit of having people coming out for bigger elections. Those city races get lost in that March on the odd year, and there is no Senate race going on. There's nothing else that takes people to the polls other than those city races. So look for your percentage of turnout to go down. So, I mean, I certainly am not saying, oh, she's vulnerable. Obviously not with those numbers. But I think there will be a serious candidate that will mount a serious campaign against her.
Probably a conservative candidate. I'm not arguing that she won't have
relatively. If anybody's painting Jack Coder as a conservative.
Well, I mean, there are some South Side politicians that still are. And all I'm saying is I don't think Jack Coder would probably have I can't speak for him, but I can't imagine he'd want to run again. And maybe he will, but that's why I'm talking about that 10-point margin being significant. Well, I don't see who this candidate you're talking about is.
It depends on what she does.
I'm not saying they shouldn't run.
It might not be a 2-candidate race, right? That's the mistake you're making. There's somebody who could siphon off black votes that's going to make a huge difference for her if she's got a one-on-one with another white candidate.
I just don't think it's happening.
You know, there could be a whole lot of interesting things happening.
There never seems to be a lack of politicians saying, I'm the person that could win that race.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And look, I think this is the last gasp of the Slay-Cruson coalition. That was a very successful coalition in St. Louis for a long time. Coder tried to run the kind of campaign that they ran. Those votes are not there anymore.
Well, they're not there, and they also said, like, okay, Francis, 16 years, Lida 4 years, 20 years.
Yeah.
During that 20 years, what happened to the city, okay? And then everybody wants to be mad at Megan Green and Tashara and all that. And they said, like, you know, they've actually only been in office for, like, not 25%, like 15% of the time these other people were. So I'm saying, like, hey, at least give them a chance.
Well, that's true. But it's a good time to be in that position because you got the ARPA money still, and you have the Kroenke cash. But that's not going to last forever.
But
and
you
I say
also have a
we'll be tied to the person who's going to be in office in 4 years or 5 years.
You also, in my judgment, have a mayor who's dramatically superior in a lot of ways to her predecessors. I'm sorry.
Well, that's a whole other topic.
I think she is.
Well, okay.
Wait, at least he's hustling, and these other ones weren't. And I mean that in a positive way. I don't mean.
Joe, thank you for clarifying that. Alvin, Joe, I want to ask you about Jana Elementary. This week, the Army Corps of Engineers went in there, and they came out with some results. They said that even though lawyers out of Natick, Massachusetts found radiation levels way too high in a report released last month, this week they said there is no radiation level after we surveyed 53 areas, took 1,000 samples, that exceeds what you would find ordinarily in Mother Nature.
Right. You know what? And, you know, that's good news. And, but once again, it always makes me wondering why people have any sort of inherent trust of the federal government. And I don't care who's in charge, Republicans or Democrats. That makes sense. And all I need to see are the numbers. And guess what they didn't bring to the meeting? The numbers. If that's what the numbers say, cool. Show me the numbers. It's real simple. And then they lay it out, and then you take the other numbers, and let's have a intelligent, reasoned look at what's going on here and figure it all out. But what they're basically saying is, we're from the federal government, just take our word for it. Show me the paperwork, and I'm willing to comment. And that's what the people in that Hazelwood district deserve. Show us the numbers. Don't come out here and tell us everything's fine. We can't prove that to you. Just trust us. We are talking about the health of our kids, the health of the community. Show me the numbers. You've got the numbers.
Yep.
What did you do? Get them on the plane?
I think
or what?
there are going to come out the numbers, maybe as soon as November 16th, which is the next community meeting. But for our purposes right now, what they're saying is as extraordinary as it may sound, that their report completely contradicts the expert who was hired by the plaintiff's lawyers.
And the expert who was hired by the plaintiff's lawyers ought to put that on their resume. The Army Corps of Engineers is not to be trusted. To the credit of the Hazelwood School District, they're saying, we don't trust you. They were asking the questions. You know, Don Chapman and the other heroes that have been fighting this fight, you know, have been told this, and I've been covering this for over a decade, that the federal government, for reasons I cannot explain, because it's not the fault of the Corps, it's not the fault of any existing government, they have been tragically, and I mean tragically, like people dying and getting all kinds of cancers, they have been minimizing or denying this. I actually can't explain why, because there have been outrageous consequences, and they've always said there's nothing to see here.
I'm not excusing them, but I can. And because that is, oh yeah, we're full-fledged. We just totally messed it up in North County, and we're going to build a new school here. And before the sun came up the next day, there'd be 500 more because the train came through here. Or everybody in Los Alamos is going to want a reparation. And, you know, it'll just be, you know, we cannot just declare that we completely messed up here, because the second we do that, there'll be places that we aren't responsible for, and they're going to be just like.
With all due respect, I think you guys sound like those guys who were critical of the CDC during the pandemic. I mean, you're just painting with a broad brush. How about this?
Well, okay, Charlie.
That may not be the best example, actually.
No,
but
I think that.
No, I'm saying
I think obviously we need the numbers, and we need maybe a third study to take a look at it. Now,
no, you know what we need to do is we need to clean up the waste. Is what we need. I mean, and
if there is no waste to clean up at the Jana Elementary, that's the issue here. Should that school be open or should it be closed?
How many times? And again, this is not. I understand your point. This isn't about whose fault it is that the waste is there, but you know, if you would take the track record of FUSRAP and the Army Corps of Engineers throughout the time that people have been going to funerals way too often in North County, where people are suffering from bizarre diseases throughout this entire period. The federal government has been saying the exact same thing, the Army Corps of Engineers, nothing to see here, it's really not as bad as you think. And so it's not that the Corps is at fault for the waste being there, but if they've been minimizing this while people die around them, showing no empathy, you finally don't trust them.
Sarah,
and that's where we're at here. I just don't
our kids
trust
have grown up. All right, but would anybody at this table send their kids to Jana Elementary?
With the Army Corps of Engineers?
No. I'm just saying, we can talk as much as we want to. And say, like, would you send your kids to school in that building?
And Charlie, I agree with you.
You know what?
No. I would say a third study is needed. But let's see the second study. Okay? I mean, put the paper on the table. All right. You know?
Let's do a study of the Army Corps of Engineers.
Ray, I want to ask you about the Regional Sports Authority, which came out with a recommendation this week that you say may have been a little bit misinterpreted by some in the media. A lot of people thought, okay, the recommendation is that Cronky cash, which should now be about $520, $530 million if we're accruing interest, should be put into some sort of endowment. We can live off the interest. This, of course, is the result of that lawsuit where the RSA, the county, and the city sued the Rams owner.
I think it was misinterpreted by some in the daily newspaper business. I'm not sure who that would be. Just somebody. But anyway,
it was me. It was me.
was it you actually, right? No, I'm just kidding. I will say this. I don't know that it's the paper's fault, for real, but I think it's easy to come away from this saying what they want to do is to use the football expression, punt, and to basically, here's the bottom line. What they were saying, which I think is smart, is let's not divide this up arbitrarily 3 ways. Let's do this as a community. I think they're right.
The money's coming, okay? figure out you're going to get your cut, and then you do with it what you want. If RSA wants to put theirs in the bank, then go ahead and put it in the bank. I think RSA is like kind of like my cat Ruben, in that he's independent and he does his thing, but he likes to get scritched on the head every now and then. And I think they just, hey, let's stand up with GSL Inc. on this one.
Well, and I'm not standing up with
okay.
GSL Inc., but I
I say
do
split
not
it
think.
3 ways.
Me
and just
too.
Move on with
I
our
do
lives.
not.
Yeah.
I think it should be done as a community.
Oh, come
with
on.
all respect to Ruben.
It'll never work.
Now, and by the
Okay,
way, that
hold on to
white
that thought
paper
for
was
next week.
nuts that they did.
We lost a great member of the St. Louis community this week when at the age of 97, Sarah Martin Matthews, the founder of the Matthews-Dickey Boys and Girls Club, 1960, passed away. Here was a guy who started an after-school program for underprivileged kids doing God's work here on earth.
Yeah, I mean, an amazing man. He was on my radio show, I think 2 years ago. He was 95 years old, just sharp as a tack, and just a wonderful man. You know, he did this for most of the time that he was running this organization. He was doing it as volunteer work. He worked a night job as a security guard. And the story goes that at one point, people that he worked with saw him in the newspaper. He just received an award from the state for being such a great humanitarian. They said, that's our security guard. I mean, that's a wonderful guy. He wasn't doing it for the money, did it for the kids, and had some great athletes come out of that program.
And it goes back a long way. I remember playing junior league football against Matthews-Dickey's teams, and that's going back into the mid-late 60s.
And me too, from Kirkwood, and he did not demand, he asked. He said, like, if we will come out there and play, would you do a home and home? And we did it twice as a kid, played in the city.
Yep.
And it was because he was able to get that job done.
And there's a photo of the late, great Martin Matthews. That's a Wiley Price photo,
Yes, it
by
is.
the way.
Yeah, St. Louis American Wiley Price.
Absolutely. Hey, speaking of things that you can maybe notice on our set, a new montage, a 3-photo montage brought to you by local artist Steve Springmeyer. We want to thank October's artist of the month, Ken Conchel, who gave us Curvilinear. Steve Springmeyer has loaned his artwork for the month of November, and we thank Steve, and I know we're going to enjoy that. Hey, that's about it for this week's edition, but don't go away, because just around the corner, we're going to talk to John Lamping, former state senator from St. Charles County, and Ken Warren, pollster from St. Louis University. This is next up. We'll continue our discussion of what happened on Tuesday. Ray Hartmann and I will pepper those gentlemen with questions. Thank you to Sarah Fenske and Joe Holleman for joining us on this edition. Thanks for joining us, but don't touch that dial.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.